All right, ready to dive in. Today we're exploring a world, kind of a world of chaos, cultural clashes, and the constant search for belonging.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
Oh, it is. We're going deep into A. A. Alvarez's Chronicles of a Nomad, Memoirs of an Immigrant, to follow the life of Carlos Rodriguez, a young Venezuelan man.
I've heard of this book. It's supposed to be pretty powerful.
It is. His life, I mean, his life is anything but ordinary.
So where do we even begin with a story like that?
Well, Alvarez kind of throws us right into the thick of it.
Oh, how
The
so?
book's structure, for one, it's non-chronological.
Interesting. So it's not a straightforward A to B narrative.
Nope, not at all. It's more
Yeah.
like each chapter is a snapshot, a glimpse into a specific moment.
So like a mosaic of experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And those snapshots run the gamut, from humorous to heart-wrenching, sometimes both at the same time.
I can see how that would mirror the unpredictable nature of his life. It's like you never know what's coming next.
Right. And you get a taste of this just from some of the chapter titles. I mean, some of them are pretty wild, like Drunks Have Softballs.
Okay, that one definitely piques my curiosity.
Oh, and then there's Selling Crack, On Fire.
Whoa, hold on. Selling crack on fire.
You read that right.
That's quite a title. You can't help but wonder what kind of wild ride you're in for.
Exactly. And the ride begins in Venezuela, where we see Carlos, grappling with the education system there.
Oh yeah. What's it like?
Well, he makes it clear that it's pretty rigid, very inflexible.
Ah, so not a great fit for a rebellious spirit like Carlos.
Not at all. It's like he sees it as a battleground, a place where he has to constantly push back against authority.
And how does that manifest? Does he get into trouble a lot?
Oh, all the time. He talks about purposely failing placement exams like he's trying to game the system.
That's pretty bold. What about his time at Catholic school? Does he tone it down there?
Huh. Not a chance. He's questioning religious doctrine left and right, challenging the priests, and even ends up, get this, even ends up as the substitute teacher at one point.
Wow, wait, he becomes the substitute teacher.
It's a wild story. You'll have to read it to believe it.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued, but it sounds like these little acts of rebellion aren't happening in a vacuum.
Right. You have to remember, the backdrop of all this is Venezuela's political and economic, turmoil.
True. Those external forces always play a role in shaping individual experiences. And Venezuela in the late 20th century, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a picture of stability.
Definitely not. And Alvarez doesn't shy away from showing us how those larger events impact Carlos's life. Like take the 1989 Caracas riots, for example.
Yes. A pivotal moment for Venezuela, a turning point.
Exactly. For Carlos, it wasn't just something he read about in a history book. It was a visceral experience. He was right there in the thick of it. It was a real wake-up call, exposing the deep inequalities simmering beneath the surface of society.
I can imagine. And those riots weren't an isolated incident. The entire country was on edge, politically and economically.
It's like the ground is shifting beneath his feet, both literally and figuratively. Alvarez even describes a moment when a stray bullet shatters his living room window.
Whoa, a stray bullet through the window. That's terrifying.
Yeah, talk about a coming-of-age story with a heavy dose of reality.
Right. And that reality includes navigating a Caracas that's becoming more and more corrupt and dangerous.
Right, he had that really chilling encounter with the potential mugger, which really brings that point home.
These weren't isolated incidents, were they? They were symptoms of a wider societal breakdown, a sense that things were spiraling out of control.
And they absolutely shaped Carlos's worldview. You can see how these experiences fueled his decision to leave, to seek a new life elsewhere.
It's like Venezuela became this pressure cooker and emigration was his escape valve.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But as we know, even escape comes with its own set of challenges.
Absolutely. Leaving everything you've ever known behind, your family, your friends, your whole life, it's not easy.
It's bittersweet, for sure. Alvarez captures that really well. The pain of departure mixed with the hope for something better. That hope that things would be different, in America.
That's a really powerful contrast, the pull of the familiar versus the allure of the unknown. And let's be honest, America, especially back then, held a certain mystique, that promise of opportunity, the land of the free, the American dream, all that.
Right. But that dream, that image, often clashes with reality, doesn't it?
Often, yes. And it sounds like Carlos gets a dose of that reality pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. He goes through the whole immigration nightmare, the bureaucratic hurdleness, the anxieties.
And then the contrast between what he imagined America to be, this land of wealth and opportunity, and then the reality of his brother's modest apartment in Denver.
It's a real reality check, isn't it? Like the American dream suddenly seen through a more practical, maybe even a bit jaded lens.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to adapting to a whole new life, a new language, a new culture, a new education system. It's overwhelming.
A whirlwind of change, both internal and external.
And it forces him to grapple with his own evolving identity. He's not simply Venezuelan anymore. He's becoming something new, a blend of cultures and experiences.
And it leads to the question that lingers throughout his journey. Where does he truly belong?
Right, a question that many immigrants face. Trying to reconcile their past with their present, their heritage, with their new reality.
It's a complex process, for sure. And things get even more complicated when he starts high school in America.
Oh, how so?
Well, academically, he excels. He's a quick learner, proves himself to be really bright. But then there's his immigration status.
Ah, right. That throws a wrench in the works, doesn't it?
It does. He's ineligible for scholarships, even though he's earned them.
That's frustrating, to say the least. It highlights those systemic barriers, the limitations that exist even in a society that prides itself on opportunity.
It's like the classic catch-22. Excel, but be excluded. You can climb the ladder, but some of the rungs are missing.
A perfect way to put it. Individual effort, individual merit. It's often constrained by forces beyond our control. And Carlos's experience in the American education system really exposes that tension between meritocracy and the limitations imposed by societal structures.
It raises some big questions about fairness, about opportunity, and what it truly means to belong in a society that, often sends mixed messages.
Right. It's not always a level playing field, even when it's supposed to be. And speaking of mixed messages, let's talk about Victoria.
Ah, yes, Victoria. She plays a pivotal role in his life. A role that really underscores how migration can add these extra layers of complexity, even to something as fundamental as love.
Their story really highlights how migration can make even love complicated.
Oh, absolutely. So they reconnect after he's in the U.S.
Right.
And their romance, it blossoms across the distance. But then building a life in Denver, it's not easy.
No, not with that hanging over their heads.
Exactly. His immigration status. It's like a constant shadow.
Definitely creates this underlying tension, a sense of uncertainty.
Like they're trying to build something solid, but on shifting sand.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it takes a toll.
Leads to that heartbreaking separation.
It's tough, but their story, it doesn't end there.
Oh, no, not at all. What happens next?
Well, Carlos, he decides to go back to Venezuela, back to Victoria.
Wow. He gives up on the U.S.
I think it shows how strong their connection is,
Yeah. That he's willing to risk everything to be with her.
Exactly. But it's not a simple homecoming or anything.
What do you mean?
Well, they face new challenges, of course, cultural clashes, and in the end, they decide to move again.
Again. Where to this time?
Greece.
Wow. So first Venezuela, then the U.S., now Greece. It's like they're constantly chasing this dream of a life together. But the circumstances, they keep changing the plan.
Right. You said it before. It's like that search for belonging that becomes like the main theme of his story.
Totally. And it makes me think about their experience in Greece. It kind of mirrors what he went through in Venezuela.
How so?
Well, think about it. Bureaucracy, discrimination, the gap between expectation and reality.
It's like a recurring pattern in his life. The outsider, the nomad, always searching for a place to call home.
And through all of this, his idea of who he is, it has to keep changing too.
Absolutely. Born in Venezuela, shaped by America, now building a life in Greece. It's a lot of layers.
And sometimes those layers, they clash.
Yeah, for sure. But it brings up a really deep question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Where do we belong when our lives have so many influences, so many different threads?
That's a great question. The book, it really digs into that feeling of displacement, like a yearning for a place where you truly fit in.
Right, and it's more than just location, isn't it? It's about connection, finding that sense of belonging that goes deeper.
And it's tough, right? Because there are all these external factors that can get in the way.
Definitely. Societal attitudes, cultural differences, even legal stuff.
It can make it feel impossible to really put down roots.
The book doesn't shy away from that. It shows how tough it can be. But it also highlights how resilient people are.
You mean like the ability to adapt, even when it's hard?
Exactly. To create your own sense of belonging, even when the world makes it difficult.
It's like that saying, bloom where you're planted. But his soil keeps changing.
But he still finds a way to grow, to make something beautiful out of those challenges.
Love that. It's a reminder that we have choices, even when life throws us curveballs.
We can choose how we respond, how we adapt, how we create our own sense of belonging.
And that brings us back to education. It's like a thread that runs through his entire journey.
It is. From those early experiences in Venezuela to his time in American high school, education plays a huge role.
In Venezuela, he's punished for being curious, for questioning things. Then in America, he excels, but his status holds him back.
Right. It's like education is both a source of frustration and empowerment for him.
Like a double-edged sword. It exposes the flaws in the system, the inequalities, but it also gives him the tools to overcome them.
He uses it to adapt, to learn, to create new opportunities. Think about how fast he learns English. That becomes a lifeline.
Totally. It's like he turns those negative experiences into fuel for growth.
He definitely doesn't let them hold him back. But it makes you wonder, what's the bigger message here?
What do you mean?
Well, what's Alvarez trying to say with this story? What are the takeaways that go beyond Carlos's individual journey?
Good point. I think one theme is just how resilient people can be. Carlos goes through so much, but he never gives up.
Yeah, it's not a fairy tale, it's real life. It's about perseverance, about overcoming obstacles that others might find impossible.
Like that Nietzsche quote, what was it? That which does not kill us makes us stronger. But there's something else too, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's about empathy, about understanding people who are different from us.
Because Carlos, he's constantly having to adapt to new cultures, see things from new perspectives.
And it opens his mind, right? It develops this broader understanding of the world.
It's like he's breaking down those walls that divide us, the us versus them mentality.
Which is so important, especially nowadays. His story, it reminds us that there's so much we can learn from each other, even when we're different.
It's about finding that shared humanity, that connection, and building a world where everyone belongs. It really does make you think. But before we go, I'm kind of curious about the author himself. Like, who is Alex Alvarez?
Well, he's an interesting guy. You know, he doesn't really put himself front and center. He lets Carlos's story speak for itself. But there is that about the author section.
Right.
And you get some glimpses into his background. Turns out he's also a Venezuelan immigrant.
Really?
Yeah, and he's got a background in writing and publishing. So you can definitely sense that his own experiences are woven into the narrative, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It adds a layer of authenticity. Like, you can feel that lived experience in his words.
Exactly. And I think he's trying to do a few things with this book. For one, he's giving us a window into this really turbulent period in Venezuela's history.
Right, a perspective that a lot of people might not know much about.
Exactly. It's not just a personal story. He's also shedding light on this wider societal context.
It's like he's bridging a gap between cultures, helping us understand a world we might not have ever encountered otherwise.
Right. But then on another level, he's also exploring those universal themes of migration, identity, belonging.
Those things that go beyond any one time or place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's tapping into something that's deeply human, something we can all connect with on some level.
It's like a reminder that stories, they have this power to bring us together, to help us see the world through someone else's eyes.
And to foster empathy. And maybe that's one of the most important things we can take away from Carlos's story. That compassion, that understanding for people who are trying to navigate, well, a really complex world.
Especially one that's in constant flux, where nothing stays the same. But if we zoom out even further, I think Alvarez might also be challenging us to think differently about immigration.
Oh, how so?
To look beyond just the headlines, the statistics, and see the human stories behind them.
Right, the real people whose lives are impacted by these larger forces.
Exactly. And to recognize those systemic barriers, those things that make it so much harder for some people to succeed.
It's a powerful message, and it's not delivered in a preachy way. It comes through in Carlos's experiences, the humor, the struggles, the whole journey.
Yeah. It's the kind of story that stays with you.
Definitely makes you think. And maybe it even inspires us to be a part of creating a more inclusive world, you know?
A world where everyone has the opportunity to find their place, their sense of belonging.
Well said.
Well, there you have it, our deep dive into Chronicles of a Nomad, a story that's both timely and timeless, personal and universal. We hope you enjoyed exploring it with us.
Thanks for listening.
And until next time, keep diving.